you missed it.
What's that? Who? Yeah, hey, that's awesome. I'm proud. That close game then, huh?
Really close. No, we should murder them.
I probably should have come and watched. I like watching a good close game.
It was. We were like tied the whole time.
Eagletown?
Yeah.
When's that? Oh no, I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm going out of town. I am going to come watch you. I promise.
I don't even know her schedule.
She told us that during football.
Well, I didn't go during football. You got to understand.
That's who understand that.
It's cold. I mean,
It's already
For real, y'all. It's cold.
it is cold. I can't do it sitting outside in the cold. I can't do it. I should have went to one of the early games when it wasn't cold. Okay, so let's talk about. And I'm not really a football fan. I'm so sorry. I love basketball though. I love watching basketball. Okay, so here we go. Yesterday we talked about proving triangles were congruent, and we proved two triangles were congruent based on all of their parts being congruent, right? But here's the deal. You don't need all their parts just to prove the triangles are congruent. Well, 3. You have to have 3 parts, but it's specific. You got to have 3 specific parts, okay? So, for one thing, if you've got 2 triangles and you know that all 3 of their sides are the same as each other, right? So, if we know that this one is congruent to this one, this one's congruent to this one, and this one's congruent to this one, there's only one triangle that can make. So, this is called side-side-side triangle congruence. So we can prove that triangles are congruent just by knowing that their sides are congruent. Y'all with me? Then we could do, like if we have 2 triangles, and we know that they have 2 congruent sides, and we know that they have an angle between those 2 sides that's congruent. So that would be side, angle, side. We know that the rest of the triangle has to be congruent. So this triangle is going to be congruent to this triangle based on a side, an angle, and a side. Side, angle, side. Y'all with me so far? Now, oddly enough, that angle, this one right here, is between these 2 sides. Y'all see that? So it's like this. You've got this angle between these 2 sides. Huh? But you could do, in theory, we could do an angle and then 2 sides, right? So here's the thing. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. And the way that I teach my students to remember that this doesn't work is I would never ask you to write ass on your paper. Which also means that this doesn't work either, right? You can't do an angle not between the 2 sides and then 2 sides. Like that doesn't work. You can't prove triangles are congruent with that, okay? That angle has to be between those 2 sides. But you could do 2 angles and a side between them. So if you know this angle and this angle's congruent to this angle is congruent to this angle, this side's congruent to this side, right? So an angle, a side, an angle, right? My hand and my brain didn't cooperate. Then you know that this triangle is going to be congruent to this triangle. Angle, side, angle, right? You could also do 2 angles and a side not between them. So like you could know this side is congruent to this side, and you could know this angle is congruent to this angle, and you could know that this angle is congruent to this angle, and that's going to tell you that these 2 triangles are congruent. An angle, and a side, right? an angle, and a side. Angle, angle, side. Right? And then there's one more that works, but it only works for right triangles. So, what are the parts of a right triangle called? Does anybody know? Like, what are the sides called on a right triangle? What's that long side called? It starts with an H. And ends with hypotenuse.
The hypotenuse.
Hypotenuse. Gosh, I can't believe y'all got that. Well,
Oh my God, I can't believe it either.
how did you ever guess?
I don't know. Oh, that's a long
Okay, so
word.
that's called the hypotenuse. And then these two sides are called legs. Okay? So, we have this triangle congruence theorem called HL, which stands for hypotenuse leg. And if you know that the hypotenuses are congruent, and you know one of the legs are congruent, then that means that these triangles are congruent. Okay? Legs. Legs. With a G. Legs. Okay? So, what works? Knowing three sides are congruent works. Knowing two sides and the angle between them works. Knowing an angle and another side works. Knowing an angle, another side, and an angle works. Notice the difference between this is side's between these two angles, and this one is not. It's outside of it, right? What does not work? Angle, side, side, does not work. Don't be an ass and put that on your paper.
We're over here laughing with you, Ross. You're like, cool. It's only funny because he's lost. Who? Oh. You're just being mean.
But he doesn't know what that is.
I know. You tell him, Alan. No.
So, that one don't work. HL only works for right triangles. Only works for right triangles. Okay? So, I do this every year. It gets a lot of chuckles from 10th graders. I don't know why. And I guess the 9th graders too. Normally my 9th graders are more mature than that. But it gets a lot of chuckles, but I promise you'll remember it.
Yeah.
I promise you'll remember it. So don't try to use that to prove triangles are congruent because it won't work. It just doesn't work. Like it's not a way of proving triangles are congruent because it won't make the triangles congruent. These other things do. Okay? If you have two triangles that the sides are congruent on, those two triangles have to be the same size. If you have two triangles that have two of the same sides and an angle between them that's the same, they have to be the same size. There's no going around it, right? This just won't work. Uh-huh. Yep. Probably. Now I'll count that sucker wrong. Just like that. Just as big as I wrote it right here. Okay. So, that's the whole lesson.
What?
Yep.
Oh.
I told you it was short.
Wait, how long did we go?
Hang on, let me get there. 8 minutes.
Speed run. Is that a world record? Dude, that would